Um,
Oh, you're back.
Everyday life across the continent and beyond. In theorizing Lagos as a cinematic text, and I think this is the real crucial point that the work does, sort of theorizes Lagos as a text. Ryan positions and approaches the city, quote, as a crossroads of cultural flows that provide the city's film industry with an array of commodities, tropes, sentiments, aesthetics, and concepts with which to apprehend historical shifts in city life, unquote. Lagos never spoils, challenges, and bypasses some of the canonical views on the African city, arguing that Eurocentric views on urban space and life has created a calcified vision of the city as a well-fabricated spatio-temporal edifice and a set of recognizable social experiences that ignore and, according to him, quote, exclude the particularity of cities in the global south and the place of screen media within them, unquote. In inserting African cities in the global discourse of the politics of screen media within them, of urban life for existence, especially the representational works that function to fashion the idea of the city in the national imagination, Ryan insists that beyond the realities and images of social dysfunction, occasional infrastructural improvements, and perennial decay, unrelenting misgovernance, and short-lived moments of prosperity and abundance, there is nothing certain or fixed about a city as such. That it is always in the making and holds something for almost everyone, whether at the fringes or at the epicenter of the city's heartbeat. Lagos Never Spoils thus suggests that screen media is an appropriate platform to look out for, gauge, and understand the vast and often invisible and quiet voices and energies that continually reconstitute and redefine African cities. Combining old-style British empiricism, rigorous and insightful textual analysis, and riveting North American high-power theoretical fireworks, the book argues that Lagos is always being reconstituted by its inhabitants, and that, quote, Lagos never spoils, because residents work continually to ensure the city sustains something for them, and that Nollywood, the industry and body of films, both embodies and represents this continual urban transformation. The broader point the book makes, and with compelling evidence, is the view that amidst seeming political, economic chaos and social crisis, lives are still being lived, personal ambitions are still being pursued, and at times fulfilled, and moral choices are still being made that serve to buttress the decency and goodness of humanity. Lagos Never Spoils attests to how Nollywood, as a form of popular expressivity, bears witness to the quotidian urban activities that are indicative of social and cultural transformations that transcend the spatial changes in urban spaces in Africa. The book's argument, of course, draws and builds on previous scholarly works reflecting on the discourse of the city in Nollywood cinema, which has always pointed to the ways in which Lagos is both the nodal point of Nollywood production and a recurrent leitmotif in the industry's visual narratives. And here, of course, I'm talking about John's work, I'm talking about Nokome Okome. And one of the things I noticed, sort of an earlier work that sort of talked about the idea of ambivalence in Nollywood narratives is Obodo Dimma's Ace in 2001, which I did find in your book, of course. But Lagos Never Spoils deepens that analysis, where Lagos serves as the main heuristic device to capture and hypothesize the endless imaginative work and subtle but effective acts of individual and collective reconstitutions of the urban sphere in Africa. Unlike the previous African scholarship on Nollywood and the city, Lagos Never Spoils proposes fresh and different methods of reading Nollywood films as socially loaded cultural texts, quote, inscribed by, rather than merely reflecting conditions in Lagos, and generate interpretations that push the formal analysis of Nollywood into new terrain, unquote. The book uses Lagos as a poignant metaphor to capture and direct readers to a wider pattern of cultural and social renegotiations unfolding in African cities. As a site of constant read modifications, Ryan uses Lagos to suggest a malleable and reinventable social space. What Nollywood films show us about Lagos, he argues, is that unlike many cities in Africa, it is, quote, a place where many things are possible and where Nigeria's tremendous capacity for creativity, ingenuity, and cultural accommodation is on full display. Now, in demonstrating the taut links between media aesthetics and urbanism in Africa that Nollywood depicts, Ryan offers three conceptual tools to make sense of the plasticity, undecidability, resilience, and relentless creativity that define Lagos. Ambivalence, entanglements, and enclosure, and I'm just going to talk about only two of those. Chapter 1 focuses on the theme of ambivalence in two celluloid films released in the early 1980s, Moses Olaya's Urumoro and Adesokan's Taxi Driver. Although one might challenge how these films come to represent what he associates with Nollywood, a genre that always relied on video technology rather than celluloid, he uses both texts to argue that, quote, these films incorporate spectacular visuals of the Lagos cityscape transformed by oil wealth into narratives about work that never pays, money that flows from evil deeds, and forms of pleasure so exuberant they kill, unquote. He further notes that these films denounce the seductive power of oil wealth in society and society's integration with global fast capitalism, while at the same time partaking in that seduction, unquote. Set in the first decade following a flourishing and easing petroeconomy of the 1970s, both films use the boundless hustle and bustle and the searing resplendence of a dazzling post-colonial architecture of Lagos to comment on a new social and moral architecture in Lagos at the very threshold of an emerging late capitalist order marked by the abstraction of capital and wealth and the moral quandary unbridled neoliberalism brought upon and promoted within Lagos as a post-colonial city. So the crucial assertion Lagos Never Spoils makes is that the city is not just the physical space, but the invisible, just the physical space, but the invisible premises, mindsets, ethos, mundane routines, and regimes of decisions that are made in that urban climate. A similar argument has been made in relation to other forms of expressivity in Africa. In a recent work examining environmental matrix in Cameroonian poetry, Eunice Ngongkom, for example, argues that in contemporary Anglophone Cameroonian poetry, quote, the city or town, as the case may be, transcends the mere fact of geography or place to assume metaphorical or symbolic proportions. Its topography, sights and sounds are appropriated as valid metaphors of a poet's vision of society. Ryan is the first to make this argument in relation to the African city in Nollywood cinema and perhaps post-colonial African cinema in general. Now, so what's my conclusion? Taken together, the crucial argument Ryan makes in Lagos Never Spoils is the idea that Nollywood continuously stirs up discourses on Lagos and thereby animates numerous ways of thinking and feeling about the African city. Now, in making that argument, the book too never offers us one monolithic or fixed view of Lagos. Instead, what it shows us is a city constantly changing in both its architectural, economic, social, and creative dimensions due to both local and international influences associated with neoliberal and cultural globalization. What we come to know of Lagos then is not a post-colonial city in chronic crisis, but a particular social climate defined by, ruled and apprehended by shifting social codes and assumptions. Ryan's analysis of Lagos in Nollywood cinema makes clear the assertion by the prominent geographer and spatial theorist Doran Massey that space is not only socially constructed, but that the social is spatially constructed too. Lagos Never Spoils elaborates on the former.
Thank you, Paul. It seems the panel has been functioning beautifully. in the absence of the four of us who have been lost in cyberspace. Um,
Welcome back, John. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, always good to see things functioning well in one's absence. So it seems like I mean, we have missed a chunk of things, but it seems like the panel is still rolling along in good time. So we'll just proceed to the next discussant in the reconfigured order. That would be Alessandro Jedlowski. As I think I don't really need to tell anybody, he's an anthropologist of media, got his PhD from the University of Naples Orientale, then had a really impressive run of postdocs in France, Belgium, France again, then returned in glory to his undergraduate alma mater, the University of Rome, to teach there, and then returned in even more glory to Sciences Po in Bordeaux, France, where he is permanently, except he never stays put, so he's in China at the moment. He's edited or co-edited a really many books and special, excuse me, journal special issues, and has written a blizzard of articles about African media industries and the circulation of African media, both within the African diaspora worldwide and also in the global South. So, Ale.
Thank you so much, John, for the generous introduction, and thank you very much, Connor and Said, for inviting me to be part of this panel. I joined the others in really underlining how much of a pleasure it has been to have the opportunity to read the book and to be part of this conversation. I might inevitably overlap some of the things that have been already said, and also because some of them I didn't hear. I didn't hear what the others said, like the second part of Ing's talk and the first part of Paul's. But anyway, let me start with basically a list of the thing I really enjoyed. That it's pretty long, but I try to be short. Someone else already mentioned how pleasurable is the style of the book. It was really enjoyable to read, and what I really like is the way it combines very clear and sophisticated theoretical discussions with the depth of analysis of specific films. So it goes back and forward between this theoretical discussion and more precise examples, but in ways and with a writing style that makes all of this very coherent and enjoyable. This is one first thing. And then the second one is what I might call the book's holistic approach. We know that this book is about Lagos in Nollywood, but Connor decided to approach these issues thoughtfully without limiting itself to an analysis of how Nollywood represents the city, but rather looking at how the city and the industry co-construct themselves. I'll get back to this idea of co-construction, which is particularly important for me. But first, I think it's important also to underline that what I call here Connor's holistic approach includes also very careful attention for the historical depth of the relation between Lagos and Nollywood. This is something I particularly appreciated, something that connects Connor's book to a stream of books recently published about Nollywood. First of all, of course, John's book on Nollywood's genres, but then also more recently Noah Tsika's book and Matthew Brown's books, which all sort of engage at different level and with different degrees of historical depth with a longer history of screen media in Nigeria, which I think is really a very important dimension of this, if you want, more recent turn in Nigeria in Nollywood studies, even if, of course, we have antecedents of this at several levels. On the same line of these works, Connor's book contributes in providing to Nollywood scholars new archival materials and historical evidences on which to develop future work, and above all, a more nuanced understanding of Nigerian screen media history. I'm thinking, for example, at the data that Connor managed to collect about box office result at the National Theatre in 1982, which was very detailed and very interesting, or the wealth of oral accounts that feed his discussion of early celluloid releases, modes of production and circulation. And among these different accounts, there are some very interesting elements, for instance, about how early Nigerian distributors refused to buy the rights of Nigerian celluloid film. So this is just these are just few examples, but for a person working on this issue, the book is really rich in plenty of details that are really interesting. These different publications I mentioned do not only share this aspect, that the historical contextualization of Nollywood, but they also have in common a particular attention for providing new theoretical basis for our understanding of screen media production in Africa. A theoretical effort on which Connor grounds the very much legitimate aspiration to make Nollywood studies increasingly relevant to larger debates in film, media, and cultural studies about non-African phenomena. And I think that, again, Connor's book, together with some of the others that I mentioned, really makes a point and makes this literature relevant well beyond Nollywood studies. There are elements that I think will be very useful for many other scholars working on other film cultures. In these respects, Connor's book is particularly fertile. Connor grounds his arguments on a deeply interdisciplinary approach that make film studies dialogue with anthropology of media, of course, production studies, urban studies, geography, television studies, and literature. And I think I could mention other disciplines here. Interdisciplinarity is something that has certainly characterized Nollywood studies since the beginning, but Connor does it in a particularly disciplined and sustained way, engaging attentively not only with the methodological specificities of all the different fields, but also with their most valuable theoretical contributions. It is hard in 10 minutes to react to the large variety of inputs that Connor's book offers. So I decided to direct my attention in particular on one line or one thread that, in my view, runs through the entire book, which I would summarize as an invitation to operate a relational turn in Nollywood studies. What does this mean exactly? From the formulation of the concepts of open endurance and moral ambivalence in the introductory chapter, to his reference to the relational turn in urban studies and his definition of the city as a web of relations, throughout the book, to his discussion of intertextuality as a force that constructs the text as a social space, throughout the book, Connor keeps coming back to the suggestion that relation is constitutive of both Nollywood and the city. Neither of the two come first, nor exist as a stable entity. There is no subject or object, for example, the city on the one hand, the industry and its films on the other, or the subjectivity of the observer's gaze on the one hand and materiality of the city on the other. But rather, there is a complex space of never-ending entanglements, a productive relationality among different actors, objects, representations, and discourses that produce what we name Nollywood and Lagos. It is this theoretical call to go beyond binary and linear models that I find particularly appealing and important. There is, for instance, a tendency in Nollywood studies, which Connor acknowledged, to construct linear accounts of the industry's historical evolution. There is equally a tendency to look at Lagos in Nollywood only in representational terms. A relational approach, Connor suggests, gives us the tool to overcome these limits, to highlight how Nollywood has always been and will always be a plural endeavor, an industry made of coexisting segments and coexisting temporalities, which produces and is produced by Lagos and other cities in Nigeria in unique and perpetually changing ways. Relational approaches like the one that runs through Connor's book view relations as constitutive. Therefore, the entities and their relations cannot be considered as being separate from one another. A non-relational approach presumes the primacy and giveness of entities that might or might not enter relations with other such entities. In most cases, the relations in that sense are presumed to be causal, which entails considering relations and entities as being separate from one another. Here, instead, the emphasis is on mutual, non-linear, and multiple causalities, on open-ended processes, on movable dynamics. In this context, as Connor suggests, the difference between the various configurations that emerge from these dynamics are of intensity rather than quality. That is, they are not ontological. For instance, one thing has a nature that is fundamentally different from the other, but they are rather, I would say, qualitative. That is, one thing presents a more or less intense gradient of a specific element. In my view, this approach is particularly fertile to better understand Nollywood's position in the global arena today, between the divergent drives in the existing Nollywood literature and in the industry practice, between internationally driven process of formalization and corporatization on the one hand, and local resort to informal practices on the other. This issue is discussed transversally in several chapters, but in some ways my feeling is that Connor, when talking about it, does not really bring his line of thoughts all the way to where it could lead him. For instance, focusing on the example of Iroko, he suggests that if international corporations have formalized distribution procedures and financing, production remains largely informal and connected to previously existing industry logics, related to the way marketers originally shaped the economy of Nollywood. However interesting, this suggestion seems to me to reproduce somehow the binary thinking that Connor has so thoroughly deconstructed elsewhere in the book. I play the game, Connor. Of course, I love the book, but let me open a little bit the debate. So what if we apply here the same relational approach developed elsewhere in the book? What if we consider that Nollywood stakeholders' positioning in the field that separates formal from informal practices cannot be a given, but it is rather always a fluid result of the complex relations between the industry actors, their context of operation, and the political economic conjunctures in which they operate. This might help us further complexify also the analysis of the role that international corporations play within this field, in particular in relation to the state. Connor rightly suggests that for many industry players, international corporations provide fundamental professional options to survive economically in a largely hostile environment. In a sense, this corporation does provide a lifeline where the state is absent or inefficient and create the possibility to develop international professional itineraries. And this is definitely the case. However, as I could observe during my own research, they also might, at times, do converge with the state's objectives by becoming, for instance, the instrument for a more precise and efficient fiscal control on producers, or by enforcing forms of in-house censorship to avoid any direct confrontation with the state, or even by becoming indirect instruments of state's effort to formalize the industry, as somehow Iroko happened to be when he entered the market just after the failed attempt by the state to formalize the economy of Nollywood with the distribution framework. So here a relational approach shows us how indeed fluid and complex are the Nigerian film and urban environments within which Nollywood operates. Interactions happen in a continuum, and the resulting configurations depend from the different intensity of each factor involved in the creative process. I think I'm almost done with the time, but I have just the last little example. Another telling example in this sense is the one Connor uses to conclude the book, which interested me particularly as I've been recently working on it myself: the role of YouTube in Nollywood. Connor rightfully describes it as a platform that today resembles a virtual video market, a sort of online version of Alaba and Idumota. But we should not forget that YouTube is also the second most visited website in the world after Google. As much literature on this platform has shown, YouTube is a hybrid medium that resists any straightforward definition. In its first few years of existence, it has been analyzed mainly in light of its openness to form of vernacular creativity and participatory culture, but it has later transformed into a hybrid commercial space. Following this original path, YouTube created for itself a unique space in which amateur productions sit side by side with professionalized amateur content, high-budget productions from studios and broadcasters, pirated films and series, and original content sponsored by YouTube itself. In the collective imagination, YouTube is often associated with trash culture, precisely because it lacks a central authority to determine what is of value and what is not. But it's also the expression of the most powerful digital capitalism. It belongs to Alphabet, the owner of Google, but is generally perceived as the most affordable and accessible channel of communication for informal amateur and low-end producers the world over, as well as an avenue for the achievement of do-it-yourself celebrity. In Nollywood, it became so many different things. It has been appropriated by marketers who have been left on the margin of the industry to create their own channels and their new sort of renewed Nollywood, but also by corporate actors. So it's this convergence in a way between Nollywood and YouTube seems to me interesting and indeed a good concluding point that illustrate this continuum and this complexity that Connor's book has so well described and discussed. And I might have a couple of questions later for the discussion eventually, but I already have put down some elements that I think maybe Connor would like to react to. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ale. So our last discussant is Tunde Onikoyi, who taught at Kwara State University, Elizade University, and Adeleke University until he moved in 2022 to the University of Regina in Canada. Is that where you are now, Tunde?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Where it must be 3 in the morning.
Well, it's 3:18 here. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's good to see everyone. It's good to see everyone, Anu Lee, Alex, and Connor Ryan. I must commend your effort. Congratulations on your new book. So without further waste of time, and of course, Professor Paul Ugo, good morning. Yes, so I'll just delve into my review now, and I'll do my best possible to be quick. Thank you. Connor Ryan's Lagos Never Spoils, Nollywood and Nigerian city life unravels the thickness of the city of Lagos and how it responds to the changing culture of Nollywood industry, and how Nollywood in turn responds to the complexities of a growing city and its inhabitants. Although Connor Ryan builds on the earlier works of proponents of the media city, including Jonathan Haynes, Onokome Okume, Karen Barber, Stephanie Nowell, in acknowledging the anxieties of its inhabitants as are reflected in Nollywood films. It takes a radical turn by engaging Lagos as a complex frame in today's understanding of the post-colonial cityscape in Africa and the global South. Indeed, the book captures the ever-growing and developing contiguities between what Nollywood embodies as an African cinema and popular arts, and what we know the city embodies in itself as a post-colonial and transnational city through Nollywood. Not only does Connor Ryan offer a brief history of the city of Lagos, but also takes us through a diachronic historical development of the industry, with the post-colonial celluloid period as a starting point. It does this from the point of view of a social city historian whose essential goal is to unpack the missing pieces in the history of film in Nigeria. Majorly, the role of the city, the embodiment of the city in Nigerian celluloid films, and the extent to which the legacies of the Yoruba traveling theater troupe permeated Lagos media city's cinemascape during that period, and how part of the tradition has survived till now and still takes center stage among video film culture and online platforms in the 21st century. His book reminds us of the structural adjustment program of the 1980s, the devaluation of the Nigerian currency, and how these experiences crippled the economy and the death of the celluloid, leading up to the rise of Nollywood cinema and now new Nollywood cinema. Much of what constitutes the book includes the analysis of relevant case studies films, both classical and new Nollywood films. These selected films are examined as not mere film text, but as meta text and as individual and collective narrative components of a complex city, an everyday meta critique of an ever-evolving Lagosian kaleidoscope, which feature the realities as espoused by the city characters of the past and the present. These city characters, much like the filmic characters in the films, in turn negotiate collectively and individually in a city, their means of survival, how to sustain their enterprise, like Nollywood marketers and distributors, especially in one of the harshest economy in Africa and indeed the global South, enshrouded and tossed by post-colonial arrangements orchestrated by those who determine those who have been destined to die and to live. That is to employ Akili Mbembe's necropolitan pronouncement. But in his book, and in the context of the various analyses done, Conor Ryan analyzes how the hardworking but deprived individual chose to live not in the bondage of the post-colonial past, but in what he has described in his book as the open endurance of the present and the presence of Nollywood in a city defined as a way of making the city work for them. In films like Owo, Silent Night, Glamour Girls, and Domitila, that is Nollywood classical examples, the characters' occupation with the city life never truly move along or progresses them further on their respective paths. Instead, the screen's metaphorical hold the characters within them and trap them in liminal medium where their perception are just as lost as they are in the real world. Tying together the physical landscape and the mediums which are explored within the films, these films share synergetic spaces and they all work to expand upon the filmmaker's focus with city realities and identity in their films. Their physical landscape and the screens that are brought to the fore in these films functions as liminal spaces which depict the fruitless divides between the past, present, and the future. Subsequently, these divides and the characters' transversals between them prevent the characters from finding concrete solutions to their issues and instead contribute to a sense of loss of self-esteem within time and space. Conor Ryan stressed that the films he selected illustrate the social relations, whether supportive or stifling, and are a central preoccupation of urban life, and that we must hold in mind both thoughts at once to appreciate the effective posture, which he calls open endurance. Conor Ryan also considers the importance of the transnational flows of Nollywood products through online platforms and into the diaspora for the benefit of all, including Nollywood audiences abroad. This is simply a reminder that around the globe, Nollywood circulates through platforms for understanding its film cultures and their context of production, distribution, and reception abroad. By viewing Nollywood films across multiple platforms, these audiences engage with the local and transnational levels of meaning offered by Nollywood filmmakers, distributors, and exhibitors. Through collaborative efforts of bridging cultural gaps and practices that constitute the unique local heritages with transnational sites of cultural productions through Nollywood film medium, while also advancing understanding of cultural forms as a human and trans-global preoccupation that cross borders. Not only does Conor Ryan continue to espouse on the presence and logic around New Nollywood as well, but also shows through the analysis of a group of films, including The Meeting, Taxi Driver, Bone Swap, and so on, construct new aesthetics and imagine a world and future of positive possibilities by creating permissive story worlds and effectively heighten depictions of a better life, and thus underscored the virtue of elision, anxieties over common encumbrances. One of the hallmarks of the book is in its approach. The author undertakes an ethnographic approach in which he interviews filmmakers, marketers, and industry stakeholders within the city, and also adopts the historical, sociological, and as well as the textual analysis to balance his findings as well as answers. Conor Ryan builds on the works of theorists such as Abbas Abkar, Bronstein Charlotte, Simone Abdulmalik, and combine their work with some of the most influential work of Nollywood scholars to make his critical case for Lagos and a contiguity with Nollywood. By combining all these theoretical frames with the analysis of the city and the films, the task led Conor Ryan to the construction of three developing theoretical frames: ambivalence, entanglement, and enclosure, which he rightly defined as the threads that binds the book while guiding the interpretation of the case studies he examined. Through this combination of link theories on the imagined city, Conor Ryan responds to the ongoing methodological innovation of contemporary research involving remediation, that is, a combinatory process which is concerned with taking older visual aesthetic forms and reconfiguring them with new approaches to create new forms while retaining attributes of their media heritage to another level through the poetics of relation theory, and taught Monday via Edward Glissant, who comes to mind. His notion is that when you bring two or more ideas together, the result becomes a conversation of lasting substance. Through these emerging concepts, Conor Ryan is able to further create other aesthetic tropes, including open endurance or simply endurance, hustle, tectonic shift of urbanity, and aspiration, but to mention a few. These aesthetics are drawn critically from how the author constructs his own ideas of relation.
Sorry, I have to interrupt you. Your time is up, and time is a problem for us now. We need to give Conor time to respond. So if you could wrap up very, very, very quickly.
All right, I'm actually heading towards the conclusion now.
Okay.
I observed that the method of découpage analytique was adopted for the analysis of one of three of the films, Taxi Driver or Kwashewo, Three is a Company, and of course Phone Swap. This is quite commendable because we hardly see this in recent textbooks that discuss Nollywood films. Aesthetics are also clearly outlined perfectly in each of the films. However, one of my observations, which is actually an argument, is that since you offered enough discussions around transnational flows of Nollywood images, one would have desired to see you engage with one or two Nollywood transnational films that capture the city of Lagos, but also this is in spite of the diasporic city or location that may embody the interstitial dimensions of the chosen diasporic film or films. Nevertheless, Conor Ryan's Lagos Never Spoils is a book about a mediated and yet mediating city that does not cease to amaze us. It inhabits the cinema that reproduces it, including Nollywood audience and Nollywood structures. In this book, Nollywood is characterized and epitomized in relation to the structures that continually define and resonate with the city's demand of its inhabitants and how they must constantly toggle the forge of existence, much like the characters that are depicted in the films which Conor Ryan so expertly and brilliantly examine and explicate rigorously through robust ideas about their afterlives in this refreshing book. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tunde. We have 15 minutes left, or 14 actually. And I'd like to give Conor 10 minutes of that at least to respond to the discussants.
Look, this is the place I must begin, which is acknowledging the immense debts that I have, Those debts begin with everybody on this panel to begin with, whose work informed this book, whose work I keep turning back to. And I would just say that when you write something, your hope is that there are people out there who will understand it, who will be eager to take that time and effort to sort through your ideas, to assimilate them and to respond and to try and create a meeting of minds. And so I want to just say, first of all, thank you so much to the panelists for their time, their effort, and their wonderful contributions. In particular, I want to say thank you to Jonathan Haynes and to Onakome Okome. I think of these two figures as having cracked open an entire space, cleared that space, and provided some tools to a younger generation of scholars to set out and explore and create newness. And so I just have to say, as I'm sure I've said to John before at LSA panels, that I carry a debt to John for the work that he did that preceded this work. So thank you, Jonathan. In responding to the panelists, I actually want to take a bit of liberty and begin somewhere a bit far afield and come back. I want to go to an essay by Odia Ofemun. I hope we all know Odia Ofemun. If not, that's good news. It's going to be great reading once you open him up. There's this essay that used to be kind of an essential citation for anyone who was writing about Lagos, especially in the arts and humanities. This essay, Imagination and the City, was published in Glendora Review, fabulous publication. Odia's an essayist, also a poet. And in his effort to think about Lagos, what is this place? What is a city? What is cityness? He draws on what he knows about poetry, but he also draws on this deeply humanistic ethics that I think he really, really well embodies. And so I want to read two quotes that were essential as inspiration for Lagos Never Spoils. Ofemun, in the essay, notes that city life throws up, quote, common problems encountered commonly by different people and to which no individualistic but only common solutions can be found. A kind of new creativity, therefore, is almost law. In this context, to talk of common solutions means never forgetting that a metaphor necessarily changes the individuality of images that it hitches together. And so there the poet is using what we know about metaphor, context. One word placed in relation to another doesn't just create an idea, but changes the words themselves by placing them in relation. He goes on then to say that, thinking along these lines, what are the ethics there? The city is, to quote Ofemun, the city is an ever-ready challenge because it is continually suggesting the necessity to find a common morality that can hold people together. So it's true that, as a number of the panelists have pointed out, my work is trying to move past certain paradigms in urban studies, move past certain paradigms that are widely accepted at this point about cities, what they are, what we can ask about them, what kinds of answers they have for us. And especially I'm moving past past spatial theory, which might have us mistake the street, architecture, built spaces as the city itself, or as cityness. And I'm trying to embrace what is now called the relational turn in urban studies, in urban theory. And the essence of the relational turn, which Ale really wonderfully outlined there, is that cityness consists in what cities bring together, right? That's ideas, languages, materials, but especially people being brought together. It's the encounters that cityness stages that makes them unique. And so it's this idea of bringing together, of the coming together that is constituent. That's what cities are. That's what makes them unique spaces, yeah? I see that in Ofemun's essay from 2001, when he's talking about the metaphor and how a metaphor in a poem, just like in a city, is the product of things being hitched together. And that doesn't just make for a great image, it changes the things that we place in relationship. He's anticipating these things that urban studies is now catching up to. In 2000, using Lagos as his space of experimentation, Ofemun was able to see these kinds of things that, as I say, are now coming up in urban studies. So where Anulika Agina is mentioning, where you say, Anulika, that I'm filling a gap, which is that in city cinema studies, predominantly the study has been, or at least initially it began as a study of European and American cities, very much using modernist tropes of flaneurs and fragmentation and such. And so there's an absence of African cinema, and we're filling that gap. I actually think I'm trying to go further than that. I'm trying not just to fill a gap. I'm trying to suggest that things that were happening in Lagos have prefigured and anticipated where North American and European theory has now arrived. And that we actually are finding that the newness of ideas began here in the global South, right? And so we're not simply filling a gap that they left for us, right? So I'm trying to model a way in which we can think in those ways. So the ethics here of the book, when we think of cities as relational, as bringing things together, what I came to realize is that what Lagos has to teach us is what it takes to live together. And I realize that might sound a bit romantic, but sometimes when you're writing a book, you need something you got to care about to keep going. Otherwise, you're going to stop. So for me, that's it. And here's where Nollywood enters. And I would entirely echo Jonathan's quote, which Anuli offered there, that Nollywood is in many ways was Nigeria's effort to come to terms with what Lagos embodied spiritually, morally, economically, industrially, aesthetically, And so that's why I found this really productive space with Nollywood, in that it allowed me to talk about and to think about what it does take for 20 million people to make this, to live together and make this place what it is. So that's where the idea of entanglement was essential. Entanglement is another way of talking about relationality. That we're not just in contact with each other, but that our contact with one another changes us, creates something new and changes us. So those were the ideas, and this is again throwing it to Ofemun to say that these are the kind of seeds of the project as it initially emerged. There are lots of great questions here from the panelists. With regard to the transformations in the industry for women, both in terms of representation and within and behind the camera, I would really want to actually shout out to someone who's doing this work and doing it way better than I can. Rejoice Abutsa at Cornell University gave an excellent, fabulous presentation on the role of women in Nollywood today at ALA just a month ago. So I would defer to Rejoice and ask her what are these transformations happening? I'd also throw to Anulika and a workshop that she held at Pan-African University a number of months ago, in which she was speaking to some of the most powerful people in Nollywood about where it's going. And it's notable that all of those people were women. And that the refrain I heard at that event was to create a business, to create employment, to create something from the ground up is an immense endeavor, but it's also a tremendous accomplishment. And it seems to be that in Nollywood right now, women are the ones making those foundations, creating those new endeavors. So I just think we need to point that out. Another thing, mindful of the time, because we have 3 minutes, I'm going to go to Ale's question, which I completely welcome, because I would love to hear some debate and disagreement here. Yes, there is in my 5th chapter a binary that I lean on between informality and formality. And it does go against the grain, I guess, of my commitment to relationality. But here's the problem I see, is that when we talk about relationality, I find it a very rich concept, but where do I position a critique within a frame of relationality? I think there are things happening in the industry that point to certain power dynamics, that power is held differentially within the industry. And for me to critique that, where I was seeing that New Nollywood had this power dynamic where formal distributors, and that's kind of just the pattern I came to see, that it was the distribution. Formality garners someone a certain degree of power in the industry today. And informality seems to be the space where that cost is externalized. And so I'm using a binary, it's true, but because I think that it really makes clear a critique that needs to be made, or at least an awareness of a power differential in the industry that needs to be thought through a lot more. And so I would totally embrace taking my kind of monolithic view of the formal sector and corporatization and problematizing that, just as I tried to take the informal sector where there's a lot of precarity and to suggest that even though there's a lot of precarity, that artists are creating careers, artists are working long hours to then be able to pay to create an original project, and that in some way that negotiation, that bargaining they're making is not a pure and simple case of exploitation, as Ying mentioned in one of my quotes. This is a place where capitalism is working itself out, and there is exploitation, but that's not the only thing that's happening there. So it's a complicated thing to have to look at. Yeah. I think that's probably all the time I have, unfortunately. There's just a whole lot more I'd love to say. But then I guess I'd probably just say the last thing is thank you. Thank you all for kind of giving me this feeling that people have read and understood what I was trying to say. Yeah, so.
Yeah, we really are out of time. I need to apologize to the audience. I did not forget that you're there. I wish I could see you. I wish there had been time to hear from you. Sorry about that. I need to thank the discussants. You have done very well. Most of all, I think we need to thank Connor for giving us the occasion for this panel. He's done very, very well. If I may offer an opinion, I think this book is not going to spoil. It's so vivid and precise that I think it will attract a readership. And it's so open and generous on the model of the city that he loves, that I think it's got legs. It'll keep coming for a very long time to come.
And
so
John, if I could interrupt there, on the topic of it coming, it is for sale now, but University of Michigan Press will make it an open access text after it has been out for 3 years. That means that it's not going to be distributed for sale in Nigeria. It will simply be free to anyone who has an internet connection. Okay, so it will be available to everyone in the world. Okay.
Thank you for that. That was the one question I did want to ask is about the availability. All right. Well, again, thank you all, and I think it's really time to close this session. All
Great.
right.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
That was great. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
John, when I'm back from China, we'll try.
Alex, enjoy China.
Ciao.
Alex,